Welcome to Chipcast, a podcast platform where we discuss and explore crucial questions about learning, education, change and leadership. Thanks for listening. And as you notice, this podcast is in English. And I'm very pleased and honored that we have two guests in the studio who mean a lot to our educational field and body of knowledge. Silvia and John, good that you're here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let me just introduce you for the listener so they have an idea of who you are. I think most of the listeners will know you. Silvia Ybarra. Do I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah,
Ybarra?
that's correct.
You began your career in education as a physics and chemistry teacher at Roosevelt High School in Fresno, California. And next you became principal of Wilson Middle School in Exeter, California, which under your leadership became a prestigious, distinguished school. So that's maybe interesting to talk a little bit about that process. How do you become that? And you were also named assistant superintendent of Colingua Huron School District. And you focus on progress from helping one classroom to helping a school to helping an entire district. And you are the head researcher at DataWorks. And you are of course a colleague of John. John, yeah.
Well, we have to admit we're a married couple because sometimes we get in trouble that you're too close to each other, you're looking at each other. So.
Okay. So you're more than a professional colleague.
Yes.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Great. Well, John Hollingsworth, you are president of DataWorks Educational Research. It's a company originally created to use real data to improve student achievement. I think that's the idea of DataWorks.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about that today because we actually made a mistake looking at data. We needed to look at the classroom and not test scores. And I know that'll come up today.
Oh, great. So not only the data, but look at the whole classroom and the didactical approach and the things happening there.
Looking at process improvement as opposed to only looking at the outcome.
Yeah.
So we're very interested in the process.
Yeah, great. Well, that we're going to talk about extensively. And you are an active researcher and presenter. You've published a lot of articles and educational publications. I listened to a number of podcasts that you visited in, yes. And you both spend much of your time training teachers.
Yeah, our real job is going to schools and training teachers.
Yeah.
Yes. And we also train quite a few principals, and because we're interested in instructional leadership.
Yeah.
You cannot outsource instructional leadership, meaning that you just have a consultant coming in once in a while. You also, as a principal, have to develop the skills, have to provide feedback to your teachers for continuous improvement.
You cannot outsource learning. You have to. That's an interesting statement already.
Okay.
But you also wrote this book, Explicit Direct Instruction, The Power of the Well-Crafted, Well-Taught Lesson, which is, I think, a famous book and was translated also in the Netherlands.
Yes.
And I said something in the beginning that it was lying on the cupboard of my parents. And my mother is a Dutch language teacher. My father is a physics teacher. And he said, well, you have to read this book. It's so interesting. And then I got to know Marcel and got to know your work more. And now you're here. So it has a different color than the book of Marcel. When did you wrote it?
The original one, I think, was 2009.
2009.
And that was 2017. And he came in the middle someplace with the first edition, the yellow one.
Yeah.
And now we're in the second one with the blue one.
Okay, great. Can you share a little bit about your professional background, maybe leading up to the culmination of this book, but also the focus in your work?
Well, ever since I was born, I knew I was going to be a scientist. And actually, I worked as a scientist for many years. But then we moved to Fresno, and I couldn't find a job as a scientist. So I went back to the university, and I asked them, what is it that I can do? And they said, they're always looking for science teachers. So I became a science teacher. And then, with my background, because I used to work in process improvement, we used to have quality circles. Mm-hmm. So it's looking at data, the outcome, and I was telling John, whenever I look at some of these classrooms, I just do not think we have optimized the process of teaching. And so I'm very good at writing grants, and I used to write a lot of grants, and I used to get a lot of grants to get additional money to do all the research. And I went back to the university and I got my doctorate. And John did all the data processing because he's an engineer, but he knows how to do programming. So, and then all of a sudden we started looking at the classrooms, and we got a lot of research money to do about 120 schools.
Well, we work with probably 100 at least to begin with, but the big focus was test scores. And you have national tests, and you've got them on the internet. But back when we started, those test scores were not on the internet. They had the raw files, but the schools could not process the files. And I was a strong programmer, so I could read the raw files from the company and generate the graphs. We bought the early color printers. There weren't too many at that time. And someplace we worked with 600 schools. But we went out to schools and said, this is your test scores. This is male, female, high economic, low social economics, and all that. And one day a principal said, don't show me the test scores. Show me how to raise the test scores. And I looked at Silvia and I said, Silvia, we're in the wrong business. Data works. We're a room of programmers analyzing outcome. Yeah. And we started thinking about process improvement right there. I said, we've got to look at what's being taught and how it's being taught.
Yes. So we started looking at time on task.
Yeah.
We started looking at the process of teaching. And then we were looking carefully at, are we actually teaching different standards for different grade levels? Mm-hmm. And we collected how many millions of student work?
Well, we ultimately went through 2 million student assignments.
Whoa.
But I have to tell you, the first one, we collected the student work from a school. We said, collect every single piece of paper from every student for a week. And we had just boxes at our house, and we were looking at these. Oh, this got a high score, a low score. We were tallying the scores. And I don't know if you have standards, but in the United States, we have standards per grade level.
Yeah. And
we said, why don't we get out those standards that we've never even looked at before? Let's look up this assignment. So the kids were doing expansion of numbers. 937 is 900s plus 3 10s plus 7 1s. I said, that's got to be in the standards someplace. So we look in there. Oh, it's right here. Second grade, expansion of numbers to 3 digits. That would be, up to the 900s. And I said, Silvia, what grade level did we collect that in? And she said, 6th grade. And I almost froze. I said, we have school reform. 6th graders are getting A's on 2nd grade work, and it's going in the report card. And then when they take the test scores, they're so far out of sync. So it was a real breakthrough. We said, we finally have something for school reform besides work harder. We're too far out of sync with what we're doing. And what could happen, the high school was being taught about the 8th grade level. Yeah. And the 6th grade was about the 3rd and 4th grade level. And there was this big, we call it the curriculum gap between the grade level the kids were in. And then we were up to 2 million assignments, maybe 1,000 schools, 1,500 schools. So that was our first big push in process improvement, was to get on grade level.
I think it's sort of a hidden secret, sort of an insight that emerged by using the data. Is it important that schools learn and know how to use and interpret data? Is that something you are...
Yeah, but it has to be actionable data.
Actionable data? Can you explain that?
What that means is that we have a lot of schools that collect a lot of data.
Yeah.
They present it, they go to the board meetings, but what they do not do is do something with that data to make it better. So that's what we try to train them. We have data collection protocols that we tell principals how to actually collect data so the data is improving. For instance, if we go around a classroom and we do not see checking for understanding, there has to be something that we have to do in order to have the teachers check for understanding more often, because we know that checking for understanding is a continuous process in the learning.
Yeah.
And but of course, the reason teachers do not check for understanding is because either they do not know how to do it, they know how to do it, but they will not do it, or there's just lots of different
variables.
Yeah. So we have to make sure that if they do not know how to do it, they need to be trained, because we cannot ask teachers to check for understanding if they do not know how to do it. Checking for understanding is a word that is used in education. The only problem is that college professors they tell us check for understanding, but they forget to tell us how to do it.
Yeah. So we know that it is important, but you don't know how to do it, and teachers
Yes.
lack
Yes.
tools how to do it.
Yes.
And the point of actionable data is you need that in order to create awareness and focus on what to improve.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's something I can. You see this in classrooms often.
Yes.
There are a lot of ideas. And,
Yes.
and indeed, there's a lot of data.
Yes.
Last week I was at a school and they were analyzing data, and I was a little bit set back by it. There's so much.
Yes.
This program, this cloud document.
Right. Yeah.
But where to start?
Yeah.
It can be a lot.
Yeah. You
Look,
have.
when we started, we were surveying teacher surveys also as part of our reform, and one of our questions was, how do you check for understanding?
Yeah.
And the answers were, I look at the quiz on Friday, I look at the homework, and almost nobody said I ask questions while I'm teaching.
Yeah.
And then see what EDI did was it said, we're going to operationalize, we're going to show you exactly how to do it. So when we check for understanding, for example, we ask the question before we call the student's name. If I call your name first, okay, here's the question, everybody listen up.
I'm aware.
You're the only one listening. I said,
Yeah.
now I have a question for the whole class. How do we solve problem number one? Now everybody's thinking. So that idea of what, ask the question before you call someone. And then, one of our strategies is pair share.
Yeah.
So every question, I've given the question, and I want you to turn to your partner and explain to your partner how to do it. And then I even give the sentence frame. To solve for the perimeter of the polygon, I will blank, or, something like that with academic language. And then both people have to talk. So
That's great.
people say, wow, I remember it was in San Francisco, I think some teacher said, I learned more in 30 minutes of EDI than 4 years of college. I know, I'm going to pair share. I'm going to have a complete sentence. I'm going to hold up a whiteboard. They said it's practical. Most
Very
books
practical.
are not practical
No, they're
enough.
conceptual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is this also why the title is explicit direct instruction? Can you share a little bit
Well,
about?
I can tell you the specific way, the exact way that came up with. There's this debate between inquiry and explicit instruction. I'm sure you have that same debate here. Students teaching themselves versus the teacher delivering the content. So at this time in our state of California, they had come out with standards. And we did a computer word search for explicit direct instruction. So in the standards, it explicitly teach the kids how to add fractions, explicitly teach how to identify characters in a story. Anyway, that phrase was in the California standards, I think 167 times. Explicitly, directly teach. And so we kind of got it. Did we get it out of the standards? I said they're saying that to explicitly teach the kids and not to use inquiry. So it kind of came out of the standards.
Wow. That's interesting.
But we also wanted to distinguish ourselves from direct instruction because we have seen quite a few classrooms with direct instruction, and we find that maybe it's just too much mindless repetition, and we wanted to make sure that that's not what we were trying to teach. But we wanted, nothing in there is something that you have not seen from different researchers. You've seen Hattie with effect sizes, talking about effective feedback, talking about direct instruction. Marzano, what works in the classroom. We have seen putting the students on the path to learning.
Yeah.
Nothing in there is new. What we did is we just took all the different research and we created a well-designed lesson and a well-taught lesson. But everything is in the research, but we wanted to make sure that we really said, hey, this is what the research is saying. Now let's put it all together. Because what happens in the United States, like when the Marzano book came out, and he's talking about graphic organizers. Now, principals went around the classroom looking for graphic organizers. But one graphic organizer is not a process of teaching.
It's just an intervention that you can.
It has to be embedded in a
the
good
culture.
lesson.
Yeah. See, technically, graphic organizer is a cognitive strategy to remember and organize information.
Yeah.
It's not a lesson in itself.
No.
And you're using it when it fits, compare and contrast, sequential order, it's the text structure and stuff. But people thought they were reforming the school because they had the 7 Marzano posters on the wall and they were picking one. But they didn't have the idea of putting it into a lesson.
Can you, for the listener, maybe explore and introduce the concept of ADI? Where you are now in 2022, how would you describe it?
Well,
It's always a difficult question, but maybe.
No, it's the whole concept of a structured lesson.
Yeah.
That you have to have a learning goal. We call it learning objectives, a learning goal. And then as a teacher, if I want my students to know how to write figurative language, which is the metaphors, the analogies, the similes, I have to create a plan that is going to enable the students to be able to do it at the end of my lesson.
Yeah.
And then we have like activating prior knowledge. The students, they come to our classrooms with lots of information, but we just, as teachers, we need to be able to elicit the information that we need for this lesson. Like if we're teaching hyperbole, kids automatically know what that is. I mean, we're always using hyperbole. We're always saying, oh my gosh, that's as huge as an elephant. We use that. We do not know that that is called a hyperbole, but kids.
I've told you a
use
million
that.
times to be quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the activate prior knowledge for that lesson. Students, if I've told you a million times to be quiet, what do you think that means? And every kid will say, oh, you're upset, you're trying to emphasize we should be quiet. I said, yeah, all of you know that. There's a name for it. It's called hyperbole. Oh, now let me show you what it is.
Yeah.
And notice we didn't use the vocabulary to activate prior knowledge. We don't say, who knows what hyperbole is? This is what most teachers do. They use the vocabulary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And nobody knows, and you hear all these guesses, and you lose a lot of time, actually.
Maybe one student knows.
So our little quote, I think, in EDI is activate the idea, but not the label. Don't use the vocabulary till the end. There's a name for that. That's called hyperbole. Let's read the definition of hyperbole on the next page or the next slide, and we'll read it. So, and then that's brain-based also. The mind wants to connect to stuff it wants to build on what it already knows. So EDI is very brain compatible too.
And then after we activate prior knowledge, we do concept development. Concept development is teaching the big idea of the lesson. I'm a science teacher, and the students go around talking about mitosis. And then they said the metaphase, anaphase, prophase, blah, blah, blah. And they repeat it over and over. Ask the students, because we have done this, so what is mitosis? Oh, prophase, metaphase. No, that's not what mitosis is. It's really the process of cell division. That's what mitosis is. It's not all this trivia. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't remember the trivia, but the trivia is secondary to big ideas. The students go around multiplying numbers with volume. You've seen these classes.
Oh, I was in this classroom. Volume, length times width times height. Here's the thing, it's 2 inches. Oh my gosh, it's 2 inches by 5 inches by something. And the kids are all multiplying. And finally, I got up and said, we need to back up a second. Volume is not length times width times height. Volume is the space inside. We never said we're measuring how much is inside this box or container or swimming pool or room or something.
It's very specific because you feel the difference while you are saying this. You feel volume inside is something different than
the multiplication.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can give you one more. We've all calculated the circumference of a circle, pi d, 3.14. So one of our worksheets we collected were 24 circumference problems. Okay, the diameter is 2, it's 5.8, it's 6 and 7, it's 1 1/4, blah, blah. The kids multiplied 3.14 times a number 24 times and never connected it to a circle. It just said, calculate the circumference. It was a multiplication lesson.
And the students really do not know that. They just found the length around the circle. It's just beyond.
Yeah.
So, and that's going back to professors at the university. Teach conceptually, but they do not tell you how to do it. No. That you have to have good definitions, you have to have good examples, you have to have known examples. Because whenever we're looking at the known examples, we're trying to undo misconceptions. Like whenever we're teaching the students about right triangles, you have to know that the Pythagorean only works for right triangles. So you have to give them a known example. If you don't have a right triangle, this will not work. And in fact,
Silvia, the checking for understanding in that lesson was, which triangle can we use the Pythagorean theorem for? And there was a right triangle and just a generic triangle. We have a videotape of a girl who selected the wrong one. Okay. And there was a whiteboard, so we called the correct answers first, and then we got around to the second one and said, so why did you pick the second one? Oh, well, if we would just put the little box here and write 90 degrees, then we can use it. And I said, no, it has to be 90 degrees to start. You know the little symbol where you put the box to show 90 degrees? So she thought that basically that it would work on any triangle.
Yeah.
Now, we caught that in the checking for understanding when the whiteboards went up and we saw it.
Yes.
So anyway, that's conceptual knowledge.
And then after conceptual knowledge, we do that first. Remember, learning objective, we activate prior knowledge with the concept development. Then we do skill development guided practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the whole process of the first problem is always done by the teacher. So I do first. Then the second one you do with a partner. And then it's the slow release. Eventually, the students are going to have to work independently. That's kind of the outcome of a lesson is. But the process of learning doesn't have to be independent learning. We learn by having a conversation, trying to discuss with our partner what is being said by the teacher. Mm-hmm. So in a skill development guided practice, it's a very important process because in the United States, the research is that underperforming students think that the teacher can do something because the teachers are very clever, but they cannot reproduce what the teacher is doing because it's not through effort or by knowing a process, but they're way too smart for them. So we train the teachers to do modeling, meaning that I'm going to have to tell you my process that I have so I know what the solution of a equation is. How do I know that? How do I know which is the variable? How do I know that these are like terms that I need to now add up? How do I know that as a teacher? And what we find in the classrooms is sometimes teachers are trying to look for a metaphor.
Yeah.
And then they say, oh, this is the metaphor.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at you and I'm the student, I have no idea what process you use to find the metaphor.
Oh, this is so classic. The teacher puts the answer, but remember in EDI, the checking for understanding questions, so students, how did I identify it?
Yeah.
And if they can't tell you, it's because you didn't model your thinking. No, you just said, oh, there it is, sentence number 2.
Yeah.
Okay, or a math problem. Oh, the answer is 12, x equals 12. But you didn't explain how to do it. So the very specific question in skill development is, the question is always, how did I do this step, or how did I solve, or how did I identify it? And the teachers, they know the stuff so well, they don't think they need to explain. Well, of course the noun is this. Yeah. Of course X is 5. But the kids are not at that level.
How do you learn this as a team or as a teacher? To do this modeling, because this is very all the phases are crucial, but I can imagine this is something difficult to.
It's very difficult to
learn,
teach.
To teach.
It was very difficult for us the way we learned it ourselves. We went into the classroom and we videotape ourselves, and I want to pay thousands of dollars for all those videotapes because of all the mistakes that we were making.
Yeah.
We just didn't know how to do it.
No.
So we will take it back to the office, and then we will have a group of our colleagues, and they will be looking at me and thinking, what did you do that for? I don't know. I mean, I was just thinking. Yeah. And then...
But Silvia, it was beyond that. It was... Silvia came to me one day and said, John, you and I are going to go teach every grade level, every content area. And I kind of got like, yeah, we're going to go out and use EDI and do all of it. Yeah. And we're going to video it. And we're going to start do it. I think we're one of the few consultants that actually, we give a training, then we say, okay, tomorrow we're going to come out and teach your classes. So set up a schedule for 3 or 4 classrooms, and you're going to watch, and this is what we're going to do. So we could talk a little bit about leadership. Training is easy. Implementation is very, very difficult. Yeah. So a real reform includes, the teachers in the presentation is what they call the awareness level. Oh, they know the phrase, guided practice, checking for understanding. Oh, they know to pull sticks. But then you go in the classroom, they fall back on their old habits.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of brain research that teachers, they fall in their old habits and don't even know they're doing it.
It's just routine. The brain sets back to the routine. But sometimes, at least in the Netherlands, what I see is that teachers will say, well, I'm very busy to observe your lesson, John. I would like to, but there's no time. there's no priority. This is a leadership question also in implementing.
It's a leadership. The mechanics is a problem. I mean,
Yeah.
the way we do it, we bring in substitute teachers. So you bring in, say, 3 substitute teachers. They take over 3 classes. You pull out those 3 teachers and work for a while. And then you can rotate. Okay, we'll do another 3
That's
teachers.
clever.
The subs rotate and go over. So that is
You
kind of
need to do that.
that's
Yeah.
the mechanics.
That's the mechanics
of how
of
we do it.
And
Yeah.
then we do the lesson first. We have a lot of consultants, and they teach lesson first, because it's very unfair to tell the teachers do this, do this, do this, do this, but they never see it in the classroom with their own kids.
Yeah.
Because in the United States, we have extreme of socioeconomics. So we have neighborhoods that
Yeah.
are very high socioeconomics. The students have lots of background knowledge, but then we have the students who are very poor socioeconomics, and they do not have a lot of background knowledge. So this, and then all the kids have to have the same outcome at the end of the school year.
Yeah.
So these teachers, you have to train them. So we
Absolutely.
have to go into the classroom with this population
And show them.
and this population,
Yeah.
and then populations in the middle. And you know that in a classroom, they have diverse populations. You have populations, some students are very good in math, some of them are not as good in math, some are very verbal, some of them are shy, different personality types. So you have to be able, we call it differentiation. You have to be able to change your teaching to meet the needs of so many students. You have the high performing, the underperforming, you have the verbal kids, you have the non-verbal kids.
I think it's a great also point that trainers, consultants need to lead by example. Show them. Do it in the class. And if there are listeners now, if the consultant cannot train in the class, it's not a good consultant. I think.
Well, what we're saying is teachers get tired. I mean, because I experienced that when I went back
me too,
to the
yeah.
university and I was told
hard
check
work,
for
huh?
understanding. Well, the problem is that the professors never told me how to do it. So I came out, do you check for understanding? Yeah, I checked, but I just didn't know how it was done.
Well, Silvia, let's go back to the classroom demos. We teach the lesson while the teachers sit in the back and watch us.
Yeah.
Then we have a little debrief. So now we're going to go next door to another classroom, and you're going to teach the same
I
lesson.
think it's great.
And teachers are so nervous. They've been
Yeah,
teaching for 20 years,
Yeah.
they almost can't teach. So I said, okay, you'll do the objective, you do activate prior knowledge, you do guided practice. Okay, I'll do part of concept development, you do guided practice. We kind of split it up. So each teacher only teaches for a little while. But we stand right up there next to them.
Yeah.
And so they say, okay, students, can you write this on your whiteboard? And then we'll say, have them pair share. Oh, yeah, explain to your partner how to do it. Let me have them hold up the whiteboard. Oh, yeah, hold up your whiteboard. Can you get your sticks? You know what I mean? So we're kind of cueing them what to do.
But it
And-
also makes it more fun in a way, more doable, and you get help. Like it's close. It's coaching on the job in a way. It's just
Well, the teacher, they're ready to have a meltdown.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
I
going to
can
be right
imagine.
there. What if I freeze? Don't worry, I'll just say, kids, let's look up here and read this.
But don't you think it's funny, John, that we are, because I see this in the Netherlands also, that there are a lot of schools where it's not normal that you visit each other, that you look at each other's
Yeah.
class lessons.
Same thing.
At university, this is
But
especially also a
Yes.
very big problem.
I can
Because it
give you a
should be
funny
normal.
story on that because I went to a school and maybe I go around, I see all 20 teachers. No, they're just short visits, like 5 or 6 minutes, but over a day or two, I've seen everybody. So I come back, I give a report. And the teachers say, well, what do you know? I've been teaching you for 20 years. I said, no, I just saw every teacher in the school, and this is what's going on in the school.
Yeah.
I don't want to be mean, but I said, you've seen yourself teach for 20 years. The teachers have never seen the teacher next door.
You're seeing yourself teach. Yeah, I think
It's
a good
amazing.
quote.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is an
And we-
important point.
But
And
we
we-
start taking the teachers now in rounds too.
Yeah.
And even when we do the lesson
Yeah.
demo, they're watching just 3 of them. They say,
Yeah.
oh man, I learned so much.
Yeah.
And they learn 2 things. Man, I'm going to use that. And then someone say, oh, I'm never going to do that. They
But
kind of see it.
it's also important to show interest as a school leader, school teacher, school leader, to visit your colleagues, to see what's happening. I think that's also a point of showing interest and giving feedback. If you don't get feedback, somebody's not investing in your development. So it has also a downside of, like, sort verwaarlozing in Dutch, neglect. Like you don't care. You just
Yeah.
And we call that type of coaching, we call it in-situation coaching.
in situation coaching. Yes. Yeah.
That means that
Yeah.
is right on real time.
Yeah.
Because in the United States, and we did a study on this, that the principals used to leave behind a little piece of paper for the teachers or an email, check for understanding more often.
Yeah.
Well, if I do not know how to do it, I don't care how many times you tell me to check for understanding. But what we found, that if we saw the opportunity for checking for understanding, and we would tell the teacher, let's check for understanding, we will put up a whiteboard, or we would come in and actually check for understanding ourselves, then the teacher will make the association.
Yeah.
But leaving behind a little piece of paper
It's not enough.
is not going to help the teacher, because I'm not doing it because I'm going against it. I'm not doing it because I might not know how to do it.
But we have the research on that now. There's a famous research study, Joyce and Showers, you can look up on the internet, but of a training, only 5% of teachers will go out and do it. Sit and watch it present. It's 5%, and you do some videos or demos, you can move it up, but you get 90% within situational coaching. Reform will not go without it. So when we talk about instructional leadership, if you don't have coaching in place,
Forget about it.
it's almost a loss. The training is almost a loss.
Yeah, it's hard for teachers to implement what they have not seen actually done in the classroom.
Oh, the funny part, I remember one time they says, John, oh yeah, we're doing all this stuff. And at the end of the demo lesson, they say, oh, we're not doing it.
I think it's also a critical reflection. In the Netherlands, we spend a lot of money on trainings, we call it in Dutch studiedagen, like days, like professional days.
Yes.
Right?
And most of the time, a lot of schools, there's inspiration, there's a good, somebody wrote a book, they talk about education, about change, and then everybody goes on to normal business.
Right.
And you're saying something very confronting and important. It needs to happen in the classroom. You need to have data, you need to follow the steps, and you need to have in situational coaching to emancipate the teacher, to help him or her to do better.
But
So this is about going through the, we started by our conversation about what are the steps, and we're going.
Yeah.
I'm a chaotic interviewer.
Yes.
So, but
I guess we're chaotic too, because we're going in different directions, so we have
that's the
double
fun.
chaos here.
But maybe, so you shared a little bit about guided practice, about in-situational coaching, checking for understanding, obviously. How do you look at for instance, testing children, like taking exams in the Netherlands? Testing now is strongly associated with stress. With we should have less testing. How do you look at
testing? Is everywhere. I'm over the debate of whether we should have testing or not. The United States has big national testing now, and we've had it for years. And the big pressure is they have these goals, and the students are supposed to move up. So most schools are under tremendous pressure to raise test scores. And principals are fired, they move, they change their district. So we're not going to get away from that.
No.
The problem is the approach is completely wrong. The main approach is work harder. There's never a strategy.
No.
If you came and said, work harder, but how about you say, we're all going to get whiteboards and use them starting tomorrow. Oh, I can do that. So EDI is very specific. We'll pull non-volunteers, we'll read the objective, we'll have a well-designed lesson. And the other thing is we need to be in sync with the content. So if we're teaching off grade level, it shows up in testing too. Mm-hmm. So we're not anti-testing.
Well, we're anti too much testing, because a lot of these schools in the United States, they test every Friday. Yeah. And that to me, it's over testing, because. But we are looking at, you see, we take a look at testing as being the outcome of a process.
Yeah.
So our idea is you cannot improve the outcome unless you optimize the input. You have to optimize the input to that. So that's our work. Our work is really looking carefully at the input. Do we have time on task? Meaning, what are we doing in the classroom? Is that productive for all the kids? Yeah. We have a lot of activities going on, and that takes up a lot of time, but we don't know what the activities are supposed to be teaching the students. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of other classroom, what we call attention grabbers. They're important. Attention, in which the teacher is okay, students, tell me what you did in the weekend, which is important, but you have to be mindful that you have 6 hours in this day.
Yeah, to
and
give
then-
good education. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's also
then
the,
eventually you have to get away from, yes, it's important that the students, but also it's important that they get some content that is going to help them become lifelong learners in the future.
Yeah, but let me tell you one more thing on this test prep, because I went through a district, I saw 45 classrooms a couple months ago, and they were getting ready for their state tests. So I walk in the classroom, all the kids are just working on worksheets, and the teacher's sitting in the back. I said, so what are we doing? We're doing test prep. Well, what is that? Well, we have this paper that looks exactly like the state test with the logos, the check, and the kids are all answering questions. I said, let's do something. Let's get the whiteboards out and have all the kids write down the answer to the first question. Okay. The boards went up. Everybody's mouths dropped. How many kids were wrong? I said, they're not getting test prep. They're taking a test.
Yeah.
There's no input. Your job should be now to go over that first problem, have the kids explain to their partners, explain. It should be a teaching opportunity. It's not a take the test. I mean, everybody was just kind of floored. I said, I hate to say, it's a total waste of time. Test prep is the content.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is when you do review, you don't put 3 problems up for the kids and say, work these. You do the first one yourself, because some kids have forgotten. And I did a big study with a principal, and he required a review at the opening of every period. And he got mad. He said, geez, only about half the kids are doing the problems. And I said, that's only half the kids remembered how to do it. Yeah. They're stuck. And so it says do perimeter or something or character trait. They've forgotten the words.
But you need to have a feedback loop that you can see where we are at in relation to your goals and your outcome, etc., etc. And if you don't have that, then taking the test, that's a very confronting way of putting it. But they're not learning; they're not getting a step further.
Yes,
you're practicing at your existing level of knowledge, and you're not advancing any.
And the funny part is, I can imagine then you will hate testing because you're just sitting there with a test sheet. And you're not learning, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
If the quality of the lesson improves, the testing also becomes more attractive as a learner.
So
the secret to raising test scores is the students knowing more. Knowing more. And instead we do tutoring, we do this, we practice, we get computerized worksheets.
Yeah.
And so the students just plain need to know more.
Yeah.
That's the effective lesson.
Actually, one of the things, and I have forgotten whether we really emphasize, EDI is really teachers making decisions as they teach. Teachers as decision makers.
Yeah.
You actually use checking for understanding as a method of seeing whether if the students are learning it really fast, then you put on the accelerator, you go a little faster. Because we're not saying use EDI to bore the students to death. Well, I'm going to say it again, and no, that's not what EDI is. It's this medium of we check and then we make decisions. Yeah. And then, but if the students, the nature of learning, we have some learning that it's much more easy to learn than other learning. Maybe science is said that it's like a foreign language for everyone. Because we don't go around talking about molecules or atoms or viruses. I mean, that's not part of our everyday language. So those lessons might be a little bit more difficult. Yeah. So you making decisions as teachers, those lessons you probably have to slow down a little bit. Yeah. But there's some lessons that are relatively simple, like geometry. Geometry doesn't take many times a whole lot of arithmetic, and the kids enjoy geometry, so it might be easier, unless you start going into the formulas, how to find the area, that's a little different, but identifying different shapes, that's not difficult. Most kids know that's a circle, or that's...
But the point that you're making also,
faster.
As a teacher, you have to make decisions continuously during your hour or 50 minutes. And you need a structure and a way and a philosophy.
Making decisions as you teach.
Yeah.
Otherwise, because teachers said, I don't want anything that is scripted. I want to be natural. I want to be organic. And then we said, no. EDI is just like a skeleton. Yeah. You have a skeleton of a well-designed lesson. You have a learning objective. You activate prior knowledge. You have concept development. You have a process. But ultimately, you have to put on the beef, meaning that you have, I don't know whether that's, well, we say put on the beef, that means that you have to
Where's
put
the
on.
beef?
Yeah. And you do it by student engagement, by checking for understanding. Like John was talking about cognitive strategies. We use quite a bit of gestures in the classroom.
Yeah, I saw this also,
To keep the students
active, involved.
thinking, involved, because the brain that is not processing information is not learning. I mean, and many times I tell the teachers, you learn it yourself because you talk for half an hour yourself.
Oh, Silvia, don't remind me of the first videos I did. I go up there, I'm doing all this stuff, and Silvia's feedback was, John, you're teaching yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're just up there doing the kids.
This is very confronting to realize. A couple of years ago, when I first got to know your work and Marcia's work, I decided to also reflect on my teachings at the university and did some small tests and EDI. And I was a little bit shocked by what my results were after 2 or 3 months learning. I was talking a lot. I was very busy, but my students had difficulty in memorizing things, so I wasn't doing it right.
Oh, I know. I remember my physics teachers. They love to put all these formulas on.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Formula. And I'm looking at all these formulas and think, I'm going to take this home and I'm going to study it by myself because I have no idea what this.
What he is or he or she is. But would you say that EDI is then also appropriate for any level or any craft, like woodmanship or brain surgeons?
Well, I did.
How do you look at that?
Well, that's interesting. I did a wood shop lesson. So it was the brake system on a car. You've got the fluid, you've got the cylinder up here, you got the little cylinders down here. So, and these were the names of the parts. Explain the diagram to your partner. Explain how it works. So that can be done too. But one of the big research it was in the medical industry, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Dr. Clark and Kirshner was in on that too, that article. But they said
Sweller.
They said it's used for submarines, for medical. You would never get a group of doctors around say, discuss with your partners or students, how would you do this operation? No, you said, this is exactly how you do it. And I think there's new research. Isn't it the checklist? Medical now, like a pilot checklist, because doctors were making mistakes that they've had to make sure they followed every step and they didn't leave something inside or whatever. But anyway, it's for everything.
Yeah.
It's for everything.
Yeah.
Any content.
I see the same thing. Last week I was at a vocational training, woodmanship, craftsmanship, where you have the apprentice and master and apprentice relationship.
Right.
That's in a way it's also a form of EDI where you learn the craft by looking at by how you make a table, by listening, by doing, and then it gets increasingly difficult and you get more responsibilities and you have to repeat it more.
Yes.
So also there you see the same, I think, structure.
Yes, and that's very important what you're saying, because we also have study books a lot and we're very interested in looking at how we learn. We learn at the very beginning, we put very simple problems, but then eventually we call it variation types. Like at the beginning, we might just have like one-step equations, but then we might move to 2 steps, and then eventually we start getting more complex.
Yeah.
And but there's also the difference between complexity and difficulty. And I think what we have is too much difficulty in the classroom, meaning that if in the United States we have like a special education, then we have students in regular classrooms, and then we have students in gifted classrooms.
Accelerated classrooms.
Or accelerated classrooms. And then when we collected student work from the different classrooms, we found that the students were actually in the gifted accelerated classrooms were given more of the same skill, meaning now you're going to find 20 characters in the book. That requires the same level of cognitive engagement. It would have been better for the students to now tell the difference between 2 characters, because that requires a higher level of cognition. So teachers mixed up difficulty with complexity. You're going to do a division. Now it's 10 decimals. 20 decimals.
Yeah, we're going to multiply 5-digit by 5-digit.
Yes.
It's the same process. It's just more complicated and takes longer. It hasn't moved you up enough.
No.
So
Moving up would be a real life application or something else.
So
Yeah.
we really train teachers to really know the difference between difficulty. I'm doing more of the same. I'm not learning. I'm not going higher in my cognition. And then complexity.
Yeah.
Complexity is I'm thinking at a higher level.
Yeah.
And then if I'm thinking at a higher level, that means that I'm differentiating in my classroom. But that's a very difficult concept because
But differentiation is better than just making the numbers more difficult. It's
Yeah.
explain the incorrect answer. Why is this not the correct answer? Give me your own example. There's ways to move it up without just adding more digits
Yes.
and make it harder.
Exactly. Nice questions also.
We
Maybe a
do-
last topic
Yeah.
in the podcast to explore with you. I'm curious how you think about what you see in the Netherlands, at least, is there's increasing attention on emotional development, social development, civic engagement, and something that is almost put on the opposite side of knowledge. Like we have knowledge transfer. That's a little bit old-fashioned. We should focus more on civic engagement, more on social development. Do you recognize this debate,
Well,
and how do you look at it?
I can give you, well, there are big debates in the United States about this patriotism and whether we should be teaching this and should we ever teach the knowledge of any other society or any other religion or anything else. But if we just look at, now EDI is really a lesson design and delivery method.
Yeah.
It's not the content per se, it could be anything. But for example, listen to this. We do a pair share with an academic sentence for every question. Okay. What students are doing is they're talking on the playground in conversational English. We're having them converse with academic English and explain how they did it. And we got some academic words. It's not my answer is. The character trait in the passage is. The Duke's character trait in the dramatic monologue is. I did that lesson once, and the teachers, they couldn't believe what their kids sounded like when they started talking with those big words. I wrote X, or I wrote optimistic, it's that type of stuff. So I like to think our interaction, we're trying to bring it up at the linguistic level. Okay. Now, the other one I think we talked about was what I call kind of like the patriotism type of stuff. Now, there are standards in the United States to teach the symbols, the flag, the different stuff like that. But that's an EDI lesson. Symbols represent emotions and ideas of the nation. For example, the flag represents the blood loss, the battles of the states, or whatever it is like that. So that's a lesson that's part of a standard. But we're not teaching patriotism none of this is actually an EDI. No. EDI is just a method of design and delivery.
And in the United States, we have a big battle with, is this developmentally appropriate? And our contention is that we have these standards. And we don't believe that these standards are ideal. I mean, I've seen different ones, and more than likely, they're probably universal. If I were to tell you here, when do you teach one-step equation, more than likely you're going to say 4th or 5th grade, maybe 6th grade. I mean, you're not going to say, oh my gosh, that's not taught until the
That's a silly idea.
universities.
No.
More or less, they're what we call universal standards. We have seen them in China. We have seen them in Australia. More or less, they're the same. So what I tell teachers, when you talk about developmentally appropriate, and this is just Silvia's opinion, is you're talking about something that is biological applied to education. Mm-hmm. And in education, what is developmentally appropriate doesn't work anymore because we have standards. And I mean, if the students in Beverly Hills can learn this, that means that these kids here can also learn it. And that's the study that should be done. So don't tell me that this is developmentally appropriate here, but not here. Now, we understand that biologically speaking, we have a window in which we learn how to crawl, or we learn how to walk, or we learn how to speak, and we are more attentive to our listening. But I think that has been misapplied to education when teachers tell me, oh, it's not developmentally appropriate. But that only happens in underperforming schools, at least in these states. And that has been our experience. But if we go to very high-performing districts, teachers will never use that as is developmentally appropriate. No, we're teaching the kids.
But I think we need to add
it's
one
a great
more
way,
thing.
great way of looking at it.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you two
you might
examples.
edit this, but
No, we're not editing it.
I was in Australia, and there's
Yeah.
a lesson in Australia. It's year 5. All stories must start with the people, the place, and the problem. I said, okay, let's do it, students. All stories must start with the people, with gestures as one. The people, the place, and the problem. Let's say it again. People, place, and problem. Now, show the gesture to your partner. People, place, and okay, now let's look at the story. Joe and his father went in a canoe. An alligator came on the river. Oh, let's look at what happened. Joe and something, the canoe, the river, the alligator, the problem. All right, so then the next day, the principal came and says, oh, you can't believe so-and-so in my class. He ran up to me and said, oh, every story must start with the people, the place, and the problem, and he learned all that. And I said, oh, yeah. And the next thing he said, he's a 5th grader, year 5, and he can't read. And I said, yeah, but he still got the whole content of the lesson. So let's separate sub-skills, usually which is math facts, addition, and reading fluency with conceptual knowledge, and especially in high school. All kids have a high school brain in high school. They might be poor readers, they might not know every math fact, but they can think at the high school level.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
one of our big thing is we're always going to teach at grade level. Let's not go down here. I had a special ed student in this principal lesson. How did you do on the state test in math? Now, this is high school. And he said, I've only been taught addition and subtraction for 12 years. And I just wanted to cry. I said, no opportunity. You can be taught geometric shapes, you know what I mean? Oh, let's get this one back, the cube. Geometric shapes, even probability, statistics. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do.
Right.
And we've limited them down to, we're just down too low. So one of our rules is always, I just call it jump the grade level. Jump the grade level.
That's great, guys. Thanks for having taking the time to visit the podcast about your wonderful book, Explicit Direct Instruction. I think we can talk for hours
Yeah, we could.
about this. It's so interesting. It reminds me of sort of, it's an infinite way of possibilities when you look at your craftsmanship based on EDI. You can do so many things when you learn, when you reflect in a team. So I really hope that teachers and school teachers and school leaders are listening to this podcast, start implementing this philosophy, because maybe it is a way of philosophy, an approach, a method.
Yes.
You're here all week, in the
Yes.
Netherlands, and visiting schools also.
Yes.
So that's cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one thing that is important to teachers to remember, this is not changing their personalities, because
No.
teachers tell me, oh, my personality is, I'm a little nerdy. Nerdy means because I'm a
You can stay
science
nerdy.
person. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that I cannot learn the skill of checking for understanding.
Yeah.
So, and that's a big difference. We're not trying to change, but we're just trying to develop a set of skills so we ourselves can be successful as teacher of all kids, not only a certain population, because those kids are easy to teach.
That's great. Thanks. We mentioned some references and literature. I will put them on the website if you're listening now. So check out chipcast.nl for more background articles and information. Don't forget to subscribe on the podcast. You can do this on chipcast.nl also. And keep checking the YouTube feed for more podcasts. So that's that for the podcast. John and Silvia, thanks a lot for your time. And if you're listening and you are in Dutch, you can order the book in Dutch, because Marcel has translated it, EDI 2.0, 2.0. And I think even there's a book for middelbare school, VO, like high school, is also coming up. So until next time, thanks.